Ladies and gentlemen, this morning we stand before you, Father of light, acknowledging that without you we can do nothing. Walk with me today. Order my steps, guard my thoughts, and align my heart with your will. Let your presence go ahead of me into every conversation, decision, and labor. I receive grace for discipline, wisdom for choices, strength for challenges, and favor that opens doors no man can shut. Let my day respond to your voice and my life reflect your glory. Ladies and gentlemen, before the noise of the day rises and before responsibilities begin to demand attention, we consciously pause to acknowledge that our lives are sustained by God alone. We recognize that strength does not come from our plans, intelligence, or experience, but from the breath He gives and the grace He releases. This moment of prayer is a declaration that self-sufficiency is an illusion and dependence on God is our true security. We come not because we are weak only, but because we understand that even our strength is insufficient without divine direction. In the stillness of this morning, we bow our hearts and admit that without God, effort becomes struggle and labor becomes burdensome. We present our day before Him, not as an afterthought, but as the foundation upon which everything else must rest. Every meeting, every task, every word spoken, and every decision made is laid at His feet. We acknowledge that the unseen battles of the day are more significant than what our eyes can perceive, and only God has the authority to go ahead of us and prepare the way. Our dependence is not passive, but intentional, a conscious surrender of control that says, Lord, lead and we will follow. We refuse to rush ahead of divine instruction, knowing that speed without direction leads to loss. As the morning unfolds, we confess that our hearts are easily distracted and our minds easily crowded, yet we choose to anchor our focus on God. We depend on Him for clarity of thought, purity of intention, and stability of emotions. We ask that pride be stripped away and replaced with humility that listens and learns. In this posture of dependence, we receive grace to respond rather than react, wisdom to discern rather than assume, and patience to endure rather than complain. Our confidence is not in favorable circumstances, but in the presence of God that remains constant regardless of what the day presents. We declare that every step taken today must be ordered by the Lord, not driven by fear, pressure, or comparison. We rely on Him to restrain us when silence is required and to give boldness when truth must be spoken. Dependence on God becomes our shield against error and regret, preserving us from choices that look right but lead away from His purpose. We trust Him to shape our priorities so that what matters to Him matters to us, and what does not align with His will loses its grip on our attention. In this morning prayer, we yield our abilities, talents, and skills back to their source. We acknowledge that gifting without guidance can lead to exhaustion, but when surrendered to God, it becomes a channel for impact and blessing. We depend on Him to breathe life into our work so that our labor produces fruit beyond human effort. We ask that our actions today reflect obedience rather than ambition, faith rather than anxiety, and obedience rather than self-promotion. We also recognize our dependence on God for protection, not only from visible harm, but from subtle traps that weaken faith and character. We lean on him to guard our hearts from offense, our minds from confusion, and our spirits from weariness. This dependence is our confession that safety is not guaranteed by caution alone, but by divine covering. We trust God to preserve us in places we cannot control and in moments we cannot anticipate. As we step into the day, our dependence becomes a living prayer, expressed in every breath and every pause. We choose to consult God before acting, to listen before speaking, and to trust before worrying. This reliance is not limited to crisis, but extends to the ordinary moments where character is formed and destiny is shaped. We anchor our confidence in God's faithfulness, knowing that when we lean fully on him, our paths are made straight and our strength is renewed. Ladies and gentlemen, as this day begins, we deliberately invite the presence of God to take the lead in every step we will take. We understand that life is not meant to be navigated alone, and no matter how familiar a path may seem, without God it can still lead to confusion. This invitation is more than words spoken in prayer. It is a surrender of leadership, a conscious decision to allow God to go ahead of us and define the direction of our day. We open our hearts and say, Lord, walk with us, not behind us, not occasionally, but continually. We ask God to guide our decisions, both the obvious ones and the subtle choices that shape the flow of the day. We recognize that destiny is often influenced by small decisions made in ordinary moments, and we depend on divine wisdom to choose rightly. We invite God into our thoughts so that our reasoning aligns with his truth and our understanding is purified from error. When confusion arises, we rely on his voice to bring clarity, and when multiple options stand before us, we trust his guidance to reveal the path that leads to peace and purpose. As we move through conversations and interactions, we ask that the presence of God govern our words and attitudes. We invite him to teach us when to speak and when to remain silent, when to correct and when to show mercy. We acknowledge that human wisdom can build arguments, but only divine wisdom can build lives. We desire that every interaction today be influenced by heaven, carrying grace, patience, and truth. Let our responses be shaped by God's presence rather than by emotion, pressure, or past experiences. We invite God to order our steps in places we are familiar with and in environments that are new to us. We understand that routine can create complacency, yet dependence on God keeps our spirits alert and sensitive. We ask that he alert us to opportunities we might overlook and protect us from paths that appear attractive but lead to loss. Guidance from God becomes our compass, ensuring that our movement today aligns with his greater purpose rather than personal convenience. In the midst of responsibilities and deadlines, we invite God to manage our pace. We recognize that haste can produce mistakes and anxiety can cloud judgment. We ask for divine balance, knowing when to press forward and when to pause. With God guiding our steps, we trust that timing will work in our favor, not because of our effort alone, but because obedience creates alignment with his will. We also invite God into moments of uncertainty, where answers are not immediately clear. Instead of leaning on assumptions or fear, we choose to wait on His counsel. We believe that God's guidance is not distant or vague, but personal and precise. Even when the way seems unclear, His presence assures us that we are not lost, and His guidance will unfold step by step. As this day progresses, we choose to remain sensitive to God's leading. We invite Him to redirect us when necessary and to correct us without resistance. We understand that true guidance requires humility, the willingness to adjust our plans when God reveals a better way. Our desire is not simply to be busy, but to be accurate, not merely active, but aligned. By inviting God to guide our steps, we make a decision to trust Him beyond our understanding. We release the need to control outcomes and instead submit to divine leadership. With God walking with us, every step becomes meaningful, every decision becomes intentional, and every moment carries the assurance that we are moving according to His design. Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin this day, we open our hearts to receive what only God can supply: grace for living, wisdom for decisions, strength for endurance, and favor for outcomes beyond human effort. We acknowledge that no day is truly successful by planning alone, because the demands of life often exceed our natural capacity. We come before God with empty hands and open spirits, declaring that what we need most cannot be earned or forced, it must be received. Grace becomes the divine supply that enables us to function beyond limitation, carrying us through moments where our strength would otherwise fail. We ask for wisdom that is higher than intellect and deeper than experience. We recognize that knowledge can inform, but wisdom directs, and direction is what preserves destiny. In a world full of opinions, noise, and conflicting voices, we depend on God to sharpen our discernment. Let wisdom govern our choices, helping us to see beyond appearances and to understand the consequences hidden within decisions. We desire wisdom that produces peace, clarity, and alignment with God's purpose. Wisdom that keeps us from costly errors and unnecessary battles. As the hours of the day unfold, we rely on divine strength that does not fade with pressure. We understand that challenges may arise unexpectedly, and responsibilities may stretch us beyond comfort. We ask for strength that renews itself, strength that sustains focus, patience, and consistency. This is not the strength of excitement or motivation, but the quiet power that enables perseverance. When fatigue tries to settle in, we trust God to refresh our spirit and restore our energy, allowing us to continue without bitterness or frustration. We also receive favor, not as entitlement, but as a gift that opens doors human effort cannot unlock. We acknowledge that progress is not determined by effort alone, but by divine alignment. Favor causes people to respond kindly, opportunities to appear unexpectedly, and obstacles to lose their resistance. We ask that God's favor go before us into rooms we will enter, conversations we will have, and decisions others will make concerning us. Let favor distinguish us, not for pride, but so that God's purpose may advance through our lives. In receiving grace, wisdom, strength, and favor, we also surrender our anxieties and self-reliance. We confess that worry drains energy and fear distorts perception. We choose to trust God's supply rather than obsess over outcomes. This posture of receiving positions us to operate from rest rather than pressure. We believe that when God supplies what we need, our work becomes fruitful and our efforts carry impact beyond what we could achieve alone. We invite God's grace to shape our character as much as our results. Let grace teach us humility in success and patience in delay. Let wisdom guide not only our actions, but our attitudes. Let strength help us endure not only tasks, but people and processes. Let favor keep our hearts grateful and dependent, remembering that every good result is traced back to God's hand. In this way, our lives become testimonies of divine involvement rather than personal achievement. As the day progresses, we remain conscious that what we have received must be stewarded. Grace is not wasted on carelessness. Wisdom is not ignored for convenience. Strength is not spent on distractions. And favor is not used for selfish ambition. We stay attentive to God, allowing Him to continually replenish what is required for each moment. We trust that as needs arise, supply will follow, because God is faithful to those who depend on Him. Ladies and gentlemen, as we step into this new day, we consciously choose to align our hearts, intentions, and actions with the will of God. We recognize that a successful day is not defined by activity alone, but by obedience. And alignment with God gives meaning to every moment. We submit our desires, plans, and expectations before Him, acknowledging that His purpose is higher than our preferences. This alignment is an act of trust, declaring that God knows the way that leads to life, peace, and fulfillment. We ask that God shape our hearts so that what pleases Him becomes our desire. We understand that misaligned motives can distort even good actions, so we invite God to examine us deeply. Let our intentions be purified from selfish ambition, pride, and impatience. We desire to act not for recognition or approval, but from a sincere love for God and a commitment to honor Him. When our hearts are aligned, our actions naturally follow in the right direction. As the day unfolds, we align our responses with God's will, especially in moments of pressure. We acknowledge that challenges often reveal what truly governs our hearts. We choose obedience over convenience, truth over comfort, and faith over fear. Alignment with God gives us the courage to stand firm when compromise seems easier, and to remain gentle when offense tries to take control. Our actions become reflections of God's nature rather than reactions to circumstances. We align our words with God's will, understanding that speech carries power. We ask that our conversations today be seasoned with grace, wisdom, and clarity. Let our words build rather than tear down, heal rather than wound, and guide rather than confuse. We choose to speak in ways that reflect God's heart, even when silence requires humility and patience. Alignment in speech preserves peace and protects relationships. We also align our priorities with God's purpose. We recognize that distractions can subtly shift our focus away from what truly matters. We invite God to reorder our schedules, our commitments, and our attention. Let us invest our time and energy in what produces eternal value rather than temporary satisfaction. When priorities are aligned, our lives carry direction, and our efforts produce lasting fruit. In our work and responsibilities, we align our diligence with God's standards. We reject laziness and carelessness, choosing excellence as an expression of honor to God. At the same time, we resist the pressure to strive for validation, trusting that obedience is more important than applause. Alignment keeps us faithful in small tasks, knowing that God sees what others may overlook. We align our faith with God's promises, refusing to allow doubt to dominate our thinking. When situations appear uncertain, we choose to trust God's word over visible circumstances. Alignment with God's will anchors our confidence, enabling us to move forward with peace even when outcomes are not yet clear. Our hope rests not in immediate results, but in God's faithfulness. As this day continues, we remain sensitive to correction and instruction. Alignment requires humility, the willingness to adjust when God redirects us. We choose to remain teachable, allowing God to refine our character and strengthen our obedience. In aligning our hearts and actions with God's will, we position ourselves to experience His peace, His guidance, and His purpose unfolding through every step we take.